Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to Sapient Thoughts, another episode where here we discuss theophilosophical issues, we answer some of the contentions that are brought against Islam, and we offer, hopefully, a robust case for the veracity and beauty of Islam, inshaAllah ta'ala, as a way of life. My name is Anwar Arafat, and today we are doing episode 2 of our case study, a problematic hadith that seems to put women down or that might seem disrespectful or demeaning towards women. And a person might read this, come across it in some of the books and say, hey, wait a second, this is problematic. So how do we deal with this? Well, as we demonstrated the hadith, of course it's a little longer. If you haven't listened to the hadith, you can go back to that first episode. In this episode, we will apply our hadith toolkit as we shared it, where we have 10 tools. So for this episode, we're going to go actually through the first 5 in applying them to this specific hadith, inshaAllah ta'ala. Tool number 1 is sincerity. And remember, we said this is sincerity towards the material, sincerity towards whatever goal it is, sincerity towards your own biases, and obviously as Muslims, first and foremost, sincerity towards God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sincerity towards the corpus means that when I read a hadith, I don't take it by itself. I understand that it's part of an entire corpus. A person easily can seize on one hadith and take it out of context and show, hey, look, Muslims say 1, 2, and 3. I can do this to almost any book. I can do this to almost any religion. Not only is it unwise, it's unjust, right? We're not being fair to the material, we're not being fair to anything. If I am Muslim and I come across a problematic hadith, I have a bias. If I'm not Muslim, I also have a bias. If I'm an academic, I have a bias there as well. What are some of these biases? If I'm Muslim and I read a problematic hadith that seems to put women down, my sincerity to my paradigm is that, wait a second, I know that the Prophet ﷺ doesn't put women down. In fact, there are so many hadith in which he praises women, right? He thanks them, he's appreciative, he's respecting, he's accommodating, he's doing all these things. In fact, arguably no one throughout human history has done more for women, giving them rights, etc., than somebody like the Prophet ﷺ, especially 1400 years ago when nobody was doing anything for women whatsoever. So I know that, wait a second, if I'm reading this in a way that it could be putting women down, I know that this goes against what I already understand from my paradigm, because I am Muslim and I'm aware of all these things. If I am an Islamophobe, I already have my bias. I'm going to seize upon something like this, and I'm going to be like, hey, oh, this is more fuel to my fire. But if I'm an academic, I know that I have to take everything within its context. That means I look at it, I analyze it. I don't just take something and run with it without actually analyzing it correctly. This is why the toolkit is so important for us. And I believe that this toolkit will be helpful whether you're Muslim or you're not Muslim, meaning how can we actually look at something like this? Did the Prophet ﷺ really mean to say that women are less than men in terms of their religion or in terms of their intellect? Let's analyze this. Let's test this. Just because we have one hadith that seems to insinuate this, is this actually the case? If I'm an academic, if I'm actually being honest. This is why sincerity is so important, that it makes us aware of our own biases and it makes us aware of what it is that we're actually reading. So my bias as a Muslim is that I know that the Prophet ﷺ respects women, so why would he say this? And by the way, this bias informs how we actually read the hadith, and we'll get into it when we do the reread at the very end. We'll go into why did the Prophet ﷺ say this? What did he mean? And this is why sincerity is very important. So this is applying tool number 1. Tool number 2 is patience. Now, what does patience mean here? Patience, of course, is in contrast to, I want an answer now. We want everything instantaneous. I read it and I want to run with it. A lot of times people will come and they'll say, Sheikh, what does Islam say about women? Okay. What does Islam say about women are deficient in their intellect and religion? The thing is, this is an incorrect question. What does Islam say is a problematic question. We can look at what does the Quran say, what does the Hadith say, what do some scholars say. But Islam as a huge concept is such a big thing that Islam is represented through a lot of these different avenues. But it's not that there's not one Islam, but that the question itself is inherently wrong. This is how, for example, the Khawarij, the Kharijites, when they came to Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, and they said, we want the Quran to rule between us, right? And so he brought, or I think in this narration it was Abdullah ibn Abbas, he brings a mushaf and he puts it in between them and he says, Quran, rule between us. And everybody looks at him like he's crazy. What? They said, this is a book, it doesn't speak. He said, that's what you asked though. You asked for the Quran to rule. But the thing is, the Quran is always read through a human being, meaning there's an interpretation happening, always. Right, whether we like it or not. Now I can interpret it according to what I know the Prophet ﷺ said, I know what some of the companions said, etc., which is what we do all the time. But we're reading it through an interpretation. I saw something wonderful where there was a lady who came to a scholar and she said, what is the ruling in my case? I think it was an issue of divorce, right, on a certain ayah. And so the scholar told her, well, I can tell you what Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah says, or I can tell you what the Quran and Sunnah says. She says, no, tell me what Imam al-Shafi'i says. And the man got upset. He's like, what? I am telling you that I have the Quran and Sunnah and you're telling me Shafi'i? She says, no. What you're going to tell me is your interpretation of the Quran and Sunnah. And when you quote me Shafi'i, it's his interpretation of the Quran and Sunnah. Both of you guys are interpreting. And she says, I trust his interpretation over yours. He's a big imam. I don't know who you are, basically, she's saying. And that's an interesting thing because we have to realize that it's always taken through that lens. So we have to have patience when it comes to we want instantaneous answers. We want to know, what does Islam say about women? That's a big question, right? Let's look at what are some of the verses say, what are some of the hadith say, what are some of the scholars say, etc. So patience when applying this toolkit, we can't automatically just write off something because we don't like it or don't agree with it from the outset. There might be something going on. And in fact, in this case, there is something else going on. So that's tool number 2. Tool number 3 is to talk to someone of knowledge. And in this case, I would encourage anybody, if you come across a problematic hadith, one of the best ways to overcome it is to ask somebody of knowledge. And in this case, we did. We consulted many scholars. They offered their interpretations and their takes, which was great, and we'll share them, inshallah ta'ala, at the end of this whole scenario. So we already did that, but we don't want to get ahead of the gun here. Tool number 4, knowledge of Arabic. We said knowledge of the prophetic language. In this case, it would save the person so much headache because, as I said, the translation is outright incorrect. So let's pause and go back to the translation, inshaAllah ta'ala. The translation of the problematic, so we're only going to go over the problematic or one of the problematic phrases, is where he says, ما رأيت, in Arabic, ما رأيت من ناقصات عقل ودين أذهب للب الرجل الحازم من إحداكن. Now, it was incorrectly translated as, I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence, I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. So this is sentence number 1. And then sentence number 2, he says, a cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you. Now, just right off the bat, in Arabic it was one complete sentence, and in English they translated it into 2, which caused a big problem. Meaning it's as a statement and not as a thing. Let's look at another translation. This is the translation of Mishkat al-Masabih that appears for us in the English translation. And what did that same phrase, how is it translated here? He said, so look at how different the translation is. Among women who are deficient in intelligence and religion, I have not seen anyone more able to remove the understanding of a prudent man than one of you. This is a completely different meaning. Okay, let me repeat this again. He says, among women who are deficient in intelligence and religion, I have not seen anyone more able to remove the understanding of a prudent man than one of you. Meaning this is sarcasm. Here, he's being sarcastic. In that other translation, he's stating facts. Huge difference between sarcasm and facts. And by the way, a person might ask, wait, was the Prophet ﷺ ever sarcastic or ever? He was mentioning it here, trying to highlight the irony that despite women being deficient, supposedly being deficient in their intellect and in their religion, they can lead a wise and intelligent man astray. So he's saying maybe they're not so deficient. If they can lead somebody who's more intelligent than them, how can they lead them astray? So that's something that will give light, inshallah ta'ala, to what is actually going on. Here's another translation. This translation, I thought, this is the translation of Sunan ibn Majah. And this is narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar. But the same thing. It doesn't mention the first part about the khutbah, but it just talks about how he comes to the women. And then he tells them, this is what he says: I have never seen anyone lacking in discernment and religion more overwhelming to a man of wisdom than you. Very simple, straightforward. This is the translation of the same. Now in Arabic, they're all the same. ما رأيت من نقصات عقل ودين أذهب للب الرجل الحازم من إحداكن. Very good. So here they translated it as, I have never seen anyone lacking in discernment instead of intellect. He uses the word discernment here. And religion more overwhelming to a man of wisdom than you. Meaning you're able to overwhelm a wise man despite that deficiency. Obviously he's saying that it's technically, or in reality it's not a deficiency, even though technically there is a deficiency, and we'll talk about what he means actually by this. So as you can see, translation makes a huge difference. And in some of these, like I said, the one of Sahih Bukhari unfortunately is completely wrong. In some of the other versions, like we saw Mashkat al-Masabih ibn Majah, Riyadh al-Salihin is okay. The translation, the typical one that's given of Riyadh al-Salihin, he says, in spite of your lacking in wisdom and failing in religion, you are depriving the wisest of men of their intelligence. Okay, so again, irony. It says, in spite of your lacking in wisdom and failing in religion, now failing in religion is completely wrong, it doesn't use that word, you are depriving the wisest of men of their intelligence. Okay, translation matters. And unfortunately the translations that are out there are not perfect. These are human endeavors. Sometimes they get it right, often they get it wrong. In this case, that mistake has led a lot of people to have issues with this, and I completely understand that, and in fact I'm sympathetic and empathetic towards that. And this is why, tool number 4, when you can access the original Arabic, it solves so many problems. You're not reading it through someone else's translation, someone else's take on the hadith, you're reading it through what did the Prophet ﷺ actually say. And this is why it's so important for us to kind of realize this. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll stop here. And we will go to the next tools, inshallah ta'ala, in the next video. We'll see you guys then. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.